from a really early age, the focus was always on education. Because at the end of the day, they felt like if I had a strong education, doors would be infinitely more open.
Life's a short and precious thing, sweet like honey, and it sure can sting. Sure can sting.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the She Dreams in Color video series. I am elated, not just excited, elated to introduce you to Razia Gonzales. Now, her occupation is something I've never heard of, and I bet you haven't heard of it either. So I'm excited to get into this occupation and personal obstacle with Razia. Razia, okay. Certified Cicerone.
Yes.
There was a lot of research in this office that had to be done when we saw your occupation. So talk to me about what a certified Cicerone is.
So the Cicerone certification program, there are 4 different levels of it. I have achieved the first 2, so certified beer server and then certified Cicerone, working my way to advanced Cicerone at the moment. Big feat, but I'm excited to be able to participate in that. So the program itself is really designed to put people in a place where they're educated in order to better educate consumers. So when you think of a wine sommelier, similar concept, except it's going to be beer focused and beer server focused.
The first thought I have is there's only 4,000-ish in the whole world.
Yeah.
How did you find this?
So I, ironically, was studying more for the BJCP, which is a beer judge certification program. Again, one of these things that most people don't know exist, but there are people all around the world that judge in beer competitions. So whether that's on a commercial level for like your breweries that you'd find up the street from here, or home brewers, so someone doing it at home. So ironically, I was studying for that when I came across the certification program for Cicerone. And through work and working with mentors and starting my career in the beer industry, it really just pushed me a little bit more to pursue that. So after achieving the first level and working with, again, mentors and the brewery that I was hired by, I decided to go ahead and pursue that second level. And now I've got the itch to do the third level. I probably will not go for the 4th level. Master Cicerones, there's like 20 of them in the entire world at this point. Not that I don't have any desire to do that, but there are a lot of things kind of on my career goals and trajectory that really kind of nip me at that third level.
Yeah. What in the world got you even in the world of beer? And I think this is another reason why it's so valuable that you're here and able to talk about it, because we don't think women in beer.
Yeah.
We don't think women of color in beer. So what in the world even got you into that world?
So I took a homebrewing course when I was in college. So 10, 11 years from, since then, I've been homebrewing since. Had a really strange experience. Like, the beer turned out incredibly awful, but I was still very much hooked on the idea of making beer. But what I fell in love with was really the history and the creating of something that most people don't make, and really the educational piece that tied into it. So fell in love with homebrewing, did it for several years. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but when you go into a job interview, one of the things that they ask you is like, if you can be doing any job in the world, what would it be? Or where do you see yourself in 10 years? And I always said that I was going to own my own microbrewery. Since entering the industry, I will not be doing that. There's so much that goes into it that most people don't even understand. But I still really much loved the education piece, the history piece, and really creating an experience for people that they can't get anywhere else. So for me, kind of falling in love with homebrewing is what planted the seed of being in the beer industry, but for years could never really figure out where I fit in. And that's something that as I kind of grow and develop and learn in the industry, I'm still figuring that piece out. And it's taken me to a variety of different places and spaces, and I'm excited to be where I am now. But, in a nutshell, homebrewing got me started, and it's really what gave me the opportunity to get my foot in the door.
Okay, let's go back a step. What got you into homebrewing? That is not something I ever want to do. But I'm also not a baker or, there's a gardener. There's a lot of hands-on things I'm not. What got you into the homebrewing aspect? I know there was like this big wave for a while where people were doing that at home. Were you just kind of caught up in that wave? What targeted you?
So oddly enough, I fell into it because I had finished off all of my undergrad, requirements. And now I had a bunch of electives I needed to take. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do with all this time? Yeah. So I was just like, well, I'm going to take some fun hospitality stuff. And my undergrad and graduate degree do not align with homebrewing at all, but decided to take some of the hospitality courses at my university. And homebrewing was one of them. I think the program has since kind of evolved since then, but that was an option. There was wine tasting and beverage appreciation. So really understanding the different like distilled alcohols. So took the class just out of pure interest, and then it stuck. And I fell in love with the process and learning, how everything worked. And I can probably blame this on my parents, but they bought me a chemistry set as a kid, and I was like hooked on experiments and like making things. So it kind of aligns and makes sense hand in hand, but it didn't really make sense or wasn't as evident from that moment.
So how were you nurtured in the college scenario? Because we hear a lot of women say, I was the only woman in my field. I was the only girl in the class. I only had male professors. What was that experience like in the university setting?
So I'll definitely say male dominated. So both professors and students. You'll even see it now if you ever attend like a homebrew meeting or something like that. A lot of the conferences, it's still very much male dominated. So fitting myself into that was a little bit of a challenge, but I think once you're in college, it feels a little bit different because you're just like, oh, well, everyone's here to just kind of learn something. So you never really pay too much attention at that point. I'm a first generation college student. I did my undergrad as a first generation, first in my family to pursue a graduate degree as well. So education for me was something that I've always been passionate about and something that's always been like a core focus for my family. But entering into something like this, completely strange. I think because I didn't have as many expectations of what it should be, it was a little bit easier to kind of like go into. But now that I know as much as I know and I've grown into this space over the last couple of years, there's definitely a lot more challenges that become evident in kind of being more aware.
Dang, that, man. So it's almost like backwards from what you would think on the outside looking in. You would think getting into the industry and having no knowledge about it is when you feel the most vulnerable. But now I'm imagining you know more than most of the men in the room because there's only 4,000-ish of you. So then it's trying to bridge that gap of the perception and the stereotype of who the expert is. And wow, and mansplaining must be fun.
It happens. It's one of those things where it's just, my background took me through marketing and advertising. So that was where I spent the last 10 years of my time, 10-ish. So it was very male dominated. I had to kind of endure a lot of those same experiences, just in a completely different industry. I think there's a lot of parallels that have helped me be a little more firm in how I feel about things and be a little more outspoken, only because I had experienced them in a completely different space. But it's not any less challenging. It's, when you're talking about something that's so specific and men have occupied the space for a considerable amount of time compared to women. Ironically, women were the first brewers and home brewers. Like historically, it was a women's role. So I love that tidbit in how it translates to the fact that now it's male dominated, but initially didn't start that way. So I think that's a little nerdy, fun piece of information, but something that still keeps me going is knowing that like I was here first. This is like my turf.
That is really awesome. That is really awesome. And it makes sense that women cultivated it, women crafted it, nurtured it, made it a thing, marketed it, got people hooked. And then it was taken over, by the patriarchy that could make money off of it. So I love that. So what is the perception from your parents? They buy you the chemistry kit, and they're like, you're going to make tons of money in chemistry or you're going to be a scientist. Like, what did they want for you when you were growing up?
So as a kid, I always thought I was going to be an astronaut and nerded out, went to like a summer camp and I experienced G-forces for the first time and realized that like I was not going to survive as an astronaut. I don't do well in high pressure situations like that. So I was like, this is probably not going to be a good fit for me. But my family was always like, you're always arguing not necessarily like in a bad way, but like if I had a point and there was something I was standing behind, like I was going to make sure that you knew it. So they were like, you're going to be a lawyer. So I grew up my entire life planning on going to law school. I did my undergrad in pre-law, focusing on like national security and criminal justice, and then took my LSAT, got started in law school, and was like, this is awful. I don't want to do this. So ended up leaving that. So where do I go from there? And marketing allowed me to create, positioning and develop cases, but I didn't have any clients going to jail, at least I didn't know of. So it was really fun to be able to kind of take everything that I had learned along the way and pull it into something that I get to do now. But all along, my parents were like, okay, we'll support this dream of becoming an astronaut. We'll buy you all the science stuff. And then at some point I realized, like law school was something that kind of was seeded into me based on outside perspectives of what my life should look like, which I think happens far more often than a lot of people expect. And something that I've experienced, at least with friends who grew up with, parents who immigrated into the country. A lot of them went on to pursue, law, engineering, doctorates, to become, medical professionals or nurses, or scientists. So I think it's definitely something, that strong focus on education and what career has that emphasis, that kind of nudged me in that direction, but it's taken a complete turn since then.
So where did your parents immigrate from? What is your background?
Both my parents are from South America. My dad was originally from Colombia, and my mom was originally from Guyana. So two people that immigrated from the country met in New York, and I mean, the rest was history for them. But again, like from a really early age, the focus was always on education, because at the end of the day, they felt like if I had a strong education, doors would be infinitely more open. I can't say that that's always true, especially when you're a woman trying to enter an industry where, one, no one looks like you, but also you're a woman. It becomes increasingly more difficult.
I've heard many stories from friends who are children of immigrants having the same. You have to, and a lot of them did become doctors, lawyers in the medical field or science field, really lucrative, heavy education careers. But the pressure, I kind of always compared and thought, man, I really had it easy by not having any expectations put on me at all. Like no one cared if I was successful, so to speak. So that pressure for you to go into law school is what you're saying was planted inside you, that wasn't necessarily like your calling.
I think to some extent, that focus on the education piece and wanting to really create a better life for, myself, and wanting to make sure that like I didn't disappoint anyone. My parents had to struggle to get here. And then once they got here, not knowing the language, not having any family that was immediately, around. So there's a lot of struggle that happens then. And you're just like, well, they had to sacrifice so much. So what can I do to make sure that I'm living a life that's in their legacy? And how do I best, live the American dream for them? But over the course of the last few years, you learn that it's not about the dreams that they have for you. It's, I can actually do what I want to do. And that for them is tremendous.
The other thing that is really beautiful to know as you go on your journey is that your American dream is what fills your cup and what makes you motivated every single day. And money can be made in that process. A very good lifestyle can be made in that process. And you're being an example of someone having a good education, going into a non-traditional field, making it lucrative, and then also paving the way for other women who look like you. So now we see down the road, you can grow up and be a certified Cicerone too, being part of that American dream of success. So that's really awesome that you were brave enough to kind of walk out of that line, especially after getting so far in the process of being a lawyer. I see that a lot too. Yeah. I've gone so far, I can't go back now. So what did you lean on to say, we're shifting gears, this isn't it?
So having a strong support system, I think, is key. I know that not everyone has that, and that's a big part of the challenge. I had a best friend that I could lean on that was like, hey, if this isn't what you want to do, think about where else you could go. Having parents that were like, at the end of the day, we just want you to be happy, and successful in your own right, whatever that might actually end up being. But I am also very stubborn in wanting to make sure that I still fulfilled, the dreams that they had for me. After being in that role for, well, almost 8 years, I was just like, I'm burnt out, I'm anxious, and I don't feel like I'm serving a purpose anymore. Like, I don't feel fulfilled. And that for me was bigger than all of the money that I'd be leaving on the table when I walked away from that job. People think you're crazy when you do that. They really do. They're like, what, are you insane? Like, you're leaving behind half of a salary. You're leaving behind the job security. You're leaving behind the comfort and all of the things that you've worked towards. But for me, it wasn't about that. It could never be about the money, because at the end of the day, if I wasn't doing something that I loved to wake up and do every day, I was living my life unfulfilled, and that just didn't sit right.
And then what did you move into when you left half a salary behind? Where'd you start? Where'd you go? You're like, I'm going to walk. Is this like a movie? I'm going to walk down to the local brewery and be like, hi, I'd like to sell your beer.
Yeah, it did not work that way at all. It actually took, oh goodness, like 4 years of like aggressive applications. In the first 3 years of applying to jobs, I got, I want to say, 2 interviews out of that total. One was in a marketing capacity, so that kind of made sense. Like, I was paralleling my current career with something that like I was interested in. But the second interview didn't come until probably the 3rd year of me actually applying to jobs. And there was a local brewery here in Charlotte opening, and they had an opportunity to come on doing part production and part front of house, so behind the bar. And I was like, well, I'm just going to apply and see what happens. And it worked out. Ended up in a role where I was brewing and cleaning kegs and cleaning draft lines and working, doing cellar work. So everything from like, tracking the fermentation process, packaging, working festivals, and then being behind the bar. So a complete departure from what I was used to doing, like a 9-to-5 desk job where I was wearing slacks and going to client meetings. And now I'm in overalls and I'm covered in grain and sweating all the time, and cleaning. There is a lot of cleaning that goes into brewing. A lot of people are like, oh, you must, drink beer all day. And I'm like, no, not at all. You're cleaning floors all day long.
Oh God. I'm formulating the made for TV movie while you're talking. You're in the city, you got your, your clipboard and your slacks and your heels, and then like a week later you just smell like beer. You're like, what am I doing with my life? But did you have that feeling of, this is not for me? Because I love how you said you felt the G-forces. You were like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
You did the LSAT. You're like, I can't do this, right? Did you have you had that feeling?
In beer, no. It's always been, where do I go from here?
Oh.
So I spent the last 2.5 years in a production role, really loving the process of creating something and being able to talk to people about it. But it's never been a feeling of, oof, this isn't the right space for me. It's always been, where do I go from here? Which I think for me is really the part that's special, because if you're in a job that's challenging you and then inspiring you to go somewhere else, that's what it's about. So I've never felt the, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. It's, where do I want to go from here? And after spending about 2.5 years in production, I had that itch of, where do I go from here? What does my career look like next? Where do I see myself in the next 3 years? So making a shift from being in a production role to being in an opportunity where I'm cultivating community and really creating experiences and space for people where I feel like I would want to be, which is something that's also been a challenge, walking into a brewery and being like, wow, I don't feel welcome here, and having to leave or make the decision to leave. So being able to be in a position now where I have the ability to create those experiences is something that's exciting.
We've heard a lot of women say when they walk into spaces where they may not dominate the workforce, we've had a lot of women say it was important for me to find my community and create my community. Have you found, especially in Charlotte is so known for breweries and beer and craft beers. Have you found you're starting to grow that community of women brewers, women in breweries?
So it's interesting because women in production roles, so we're talking about brewers, head brewers, it's such a small percentage of women. I think I had read at some point that it was something like 3% or less than 3% of women are in the brew house. So that's a very tiny amount compared to all of the women that work within the industry. So it's been a challenge to find a lot of women who have been in directly production roles for me to communicate with or connect with. Even more challenging to find women who are in those roles that are Hispanic or women of color. So finding those have been a little bit challenging, but they're out there, and that's really wonderful. And thankful, social media does have some good to it. I've been able to connect with women all around the country who are like-minded and look like myself when I look in the mirror. But in addition to that, just Charlotte is such an incredible city. It's constantly growing. The beer community here is probably unlike anything that I've ever experienced. I spent some time in Miami trying to navigate their craft beer scene, trying to find a job. And this is after I had experience and, was told things like, you're a cute girl, you should be an influencer. And that was hard because I had spent so much time building my resume and putting in the work to just almost be told that, like, you're still not good enough. But specifically here in Charlotte, the community has been so loving and opening and giving. And there are organizations like Pink Boot Society, specifically our Charlotte chapter, has been incredible. And I've had an opportunity to connect not just with women, but women of color, which, again, is a challenge. But to know that I can, go brew beer with them or talk about our experiences in the industry or just have someone you can lean on when things are a little bit more challenging than you expect them to be, because beer isn't always fun. It's not always a super fun conversation, but definitely finding that here in Charlotte. I may not find it everywhere, but I'm thankful to at least have it here.
It can really take you through another work day, through another work week, when you have someone else you can speak to who truly has potential to understand walking in your shoes. And even our ethnicity differences are a filter in that understanding, right? So when you have someone else who really could empathize, it really alleviates some of that. Am I alone? Am I crazy? Is it me? Should I keep doing this? Should I be in that space? So I'm sure after this, you're going to have a lot of women reach out to you. Are you ready for women here to reach out to you and say, I've been looking for you?
I love to continue the conversation. I want people to know that they're welcome. I want to see more women succeed, which, oftentimes doesn't necessarily feel it's the case. I've received criticism for women who were just like, oh, well, it's a man's job, or men that brew beer have award-winning beer compared to women, just things like that. And it sounds silly, but it's true and it exists. So to be able to have a community of people who are like-minded and really do want to inspire and encourage you to do things, that's really where it's at. And I've been thankful to work alongside those people who I still get to connect to all the time, who continuously encourage me, because imposter syndrome in this industry is very, very real. And it's something that you have to almost convince yourself, like, I deserve to be here. I've earned the right to be here. And it's a constant conversation. It's not something that you encounter easily, but it's something that, like, you encounter almost daily. And wondering, once I level up in my next certification, like, am I good enough then? How much more do I actually have to achieve to become worthy of being in that space? And, part of pursuing the certification program really came from that. How much more educated can I be? How much more can I prove to you with a piece of paper that, like, I've earned the right to be here, I know the information, and this certifies that I can.
Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that women tend to feel the academic side of things will give them that stamp of approval. And then that's met with, jerks, jerk rebuttals. So it's definitely it's definitely what you're saying is resonating in so many other interviews and so many other industries that we've had. But I'm fascinated that truly, even myself, I have not seen that many women in the beer industry. And I can imagine the frustration of you're a cute girl, work the front of the house, or, upsell the customer rather than taking your feedback on formulas and the science behind beer. You haven't even really been able to talk about what you know about the science behind beer and where the future of the beer industry is going and options that we have here and the potential that we have. And then add in your incredible corporate marketing experience that would probably blow most people away who just want to open a brewery as a hobby or, as another business venture. So you're kind of like a quadruple threat in this space. And then being that creates this animosity with people who are insecure and not as good as you. And so then they want to lash out.
I feel like I've met a lot of women who, regardless of the industry, have always said, I've achieved so much. I've acquired all of these degrees. I have the certification, but I still don't feel good enough. It's coming to the table and saying, well, I want this job and now I want to be paid to do that job, which I think is also part of the equation. We have folks that are entering the industry, but then they're not being paid enough to do that work because they're absolutely worthy of it. But the opportunities are limited. The funding for it is limited. And it just continues to compound. And at some point, I worry that more women are going to leave the industry than actually enter it because there are consistently barriers. And at some point, there's a breaking point of, are we going to continue to encourage women to enter the industry, or are we just going to throw our hands up and say at this point, if they want to leave, just let them leave because we don't want to create the space for them. Part of the work that I do outside of just, my normal brewery work is really creating spaces, safer spaces for women to enter the industry, for people of color to enter the industry, because for far too long, and this goes across many other industries, there's harassment and not just it's sexual harassment, it's racism, it's sexism. There's so many different layers of it within the industry. And again, it goes back to the fact that beer is fun, but it's not always fun for everyone. And for me, having a platform, having a space here, it's important for me to also make sure that space is safe for everybody, because that doesn't happen all the time. And oftentimes it's marginalized folks that are talking about it, that are creating the spaces, and they're the ones with the burden to prove it. So it's challenging outside of all of the other things. Coupling that with it really makes it something that's difficult, but I'm standing firm in my belief that if I continue to push through and persevere, I'll be able to create kind of more of an open door for more people that are like me. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs, so there's kind of that entrepreneurial spirit stuck in me. Oftentimes it's a lot of coaxing it out, don't be scared to do it. Don't be scared to take the next plunge or the next step or ask the question. So I'm thankful for that. It's super challenging to know that they don't necessarily get to see it firsthand, but know that that's always a presence that's going to be there forever, and I get to carry it on. So
yeah, it's a legacy. It's their legacy, and now your legacy that you're just building on and passing on and influencing. And through things like this, people you'll never meet, you're influencing and making waves and creating new futures for people, which is really beautiful. That is a beautiful American dream. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this and being so open about it. And thank you for gracing Charlotte with your knowledge and your expertise and your beautiful light. I'm really excited to have met you and found you and hear your story and share it with other people. And it's just another reminder, if you have something called on you in your heart, you got to follow it. You got to follow it. Our team learned so much in Razia's interview through our research and preparation and the interview itself. And when we were looking for a t-shirt to support her story, we found this one, Support Women in Beer. It's perfect. This shirt comes from the Hobbyist Shop, which is also woman-owned. And they have a mission to encourage women to take up space in the beer industry. They have t-shirts, they have goods, they also have events, and their whole goal is to really encourage women to be supported in the beer community.
It's our turn, won't let it burn. It's our turn,